see what we can see. Let's start with the digestive system. Yeah. Where does it start? You know where. Remember, we're talking alimentary, which just means nutritional procurement. If we want to get more specific, we can say digestive, because remember, not all things digest that are in the animal world, but we certainly do, and they do. If we want to get more specific, we call it the gastrointestinal system, because we actually have a stomach and we have intestines. Starts orally, as we just saw, food going past the epiglottis into the esophagus, which just means gullet. The esophagus you won't see here because it's hidden behind the trachea, which you can just barely see there, but you can see it. You can even see the tracheal rings. We're going to come back to that though. Esophagus goes all the way past the heart, again deep to the heart, along the backbone, through the diaphragm, and then into the stomach. There's the stomach. Now I'm going to do a little cutting here after I point out something really, really important, and that is the life force for all of us fetuses or feti. That is the umbilical vein coming from mom. The biggest one here. I know it's small, but that's where it's coming from the placenta, where mom has added oxygen, removed CO2, and increased the nutrient load so that you can live until it is time to greet the world. Now I'm going to cut that after you, again, see that goes right to the liver and then on to the heart. Why to the liver first? So the liver can detoxify anything that might still be in there that's bad. Now, in order to see things a little better, we're going to cut that so we can push certain things aside. Where were we? We were at the esophagus, entering the stomach. After the stomach, oh, look at that, the duodenum. Remember the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine? What three things end up there? Well, let's take a little look. We have the gallbladder, which stores the bile from the liver. There it goes, right into the duodenum. We have the thing we've mentioned already, of course, the other lumen of 2-3 lumens, stomach, which enters it right here. And then that most beautiful of all organs. Well, perhaps it's not the most beautiful, but it certainly is a hard worker. That gorgeous thing called the pancreas. See, entering right into the duodenum there. From duodenum to the second part of the small intestine, the jejunum, where most digestion and absorption takes place. To the third part, the ileum. The ileum, which leads into the large intestine, which also has 3 parts in a pig and in us. Just that the part in the pig, known as the cecum, is much, much, much bigger than in us. Ours is really a vestigial portion. Now, what don't they have in there? Yeah, we already said it. They don't have bacteria, they don't have protists, but eventually they will because they eat so much plant material. From the cecum to the colon. What kind of part of the colon? Well, look at the shape. It goes around little curlicues. We call it the spiral colon. And then eventually to the rectum. Out the anus, which we've already shown you. That kind of rounds out the digestive system. Later we'll put labels on it and show you some still pictures of it. Let's move on to the respiratory. Now we're not going to see every bit of respiratory, but we can see a lot of it. Again, where does it start? Oral cavity. Nares, which you can't see in here, but you know what the nares are, nostrils, and the buccal cavity or oral cavity. Again, past the epiglottis, through the glottis, into the trachea. Now I'll show you that once again. You're only seeing part of it here, but if you look closely or have a good imagination, you can see the cartilage rings that keep it open. If you can't see them, well, feel your own cartilage rings. You'll believe it. Goes all the way to the lungs, but not before the trachea splits to 2 bronchi. The bronchi split to smaller secondary and tertiary bronchi, and then into bronchioles. Now, why are these so meaty? Gosh, they don't look like they'd float, because of course they wouldn't. From the bronchioles, they go to the alveoli. Are there alveoli in here? Well, by definition, an alveolus is a hollow cavity. So indeed, there are no alveoli yet. They have not been filled with air. Did you come up with that? That other thing that they don't have, that we must have as adults? In fact, after our first breath, or else we can't make it, that would be air. So no bacteria, no air. But unless we have both of them, we're goners. Now, as long as we're finishing off the respiratory system, let's take a moment to honor these membranes, these serous membranes. There's one of them, lining the chest cavity, the pleura. That's the one that is peripheral to the lungs, but we don't use peri at the beginning. We call it pleura. What am I touching? Visceral pleura. What am I touching? Parietal pleura. Now, if we look closely, we'll notice that that pleura is continuous with this beautiful stuff. We'll get back to that, but I'll just make a quick mention. You know what we've just entered? The pericardial cavity. This would be the parietal pericardium. That would be, yes, the visceral pericardium. And the last thing, which I didn't mention while I was down in the other section of the coelom. Remember, we do have one coelom, just as any coelomic animal does. But we are the only ones to have two different parts of it. The abdominal cavity, some call it the peritoneal cavity because of the peritoneum on each organ and lining the wall. And the thoracic cavity, or chest. Cardiovascular. Cardiovascular. Do we have anything here we can talk about? Sure we do. We're not going to see it because there's kind of limited visualization. But we will at least hit the high points, the important traits and functions. We've already mentioned the protective serous membrane that makes a serum-like fluid that decreases friction, allows that to beat billions of times in a lifetime. And the other thing I'd like to point out, after I remind you of how we are looking at this pig, is how you identify what sides of the heart you're looking at. Now, by position, I'm talking about what you'll see in any anatomy and physiology book usually, and that is normal anatomical positioning, wherein the organism's right is on your left and its left is on your right. Confusing at first, but you'll figure it out. We'll open that pericardium a little bit after we point out, oh my, what's this? Well, sometimes it's a little confusing. This can be the brown fat, or it can be the extension of the thymus glands, which you will see here on either side of the trachea. If you part those and look right down on the midline, you will see the thyroid gland. Now, yes, these are not part of the digestive or the cardiovascular. They are endocrine, but certainly important enough to be mentioned. Again, thymus glands definitely up here. They can extend into the chest. Often this is brown fat, which heats the heart, which heats the blood, which heats the animal, which allows this little bitty piggly wiggly, or a calf, or a goat, or a sheep, or a horse, filly, to get up within 15 minutes of being born. Cardiovascular. Again, we won't see the details, but let me just show you the heart. How are we going to tell which is which? You see that point? There is point number one. That is the apex. That is always on the left side, the stronger of the two sides. Second thing to look for is a branch of the coronary artery. There's that corona thing again. That's right, because it can mean crown or a little luminous ring. So the little crown goes around there, gives off a branch, and that separates the left from the right side. And thirdly, the anterior-most blood vessel, that big, beautiful thing, is the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary trunk always, always, always comes from the right side of the heart. So 3 different ways you can tell with the left from the right. Now that we mentioned left and right, let's also remind ourselves that, yes, there are 4 chambers. You won't see them until some point we cut into them, but on the outside you can get an idea. Each loop has both an atrium and a ventricle, atrium and ventricle. The right loop, or pulmonic loop, goes only to the lungs, never anyplace else. The left always goes to the body or the system, so we call it the systemic loop. That's the same as in an adult too. Although there is a big difference based on these extra vessels that we no longer have. Remember that vessel that